All right, everyone, welcome to Forward, the podcast of the Forward Thinking Chiropractic Alliance. We are here with Dr. Andrew Bruns and how do we put this? What do we call Portland Health Supply? Is it your company? Is it
Yeah,
what is this thing, Portland Health Supply?
I always confuse people a little bit because of the name. I think it is a medical device company, and I do make my own products. Early on, I did a mixture of both. I was carrying other products too, and
Right.
so the idea was that a lot of my chiro friends, as chiropractor myself, they were looking to buy products or the monthly products and things. So I tried to find a way to see if I could make some of those for my colleagues, and it started with small things like e-stim pads and pillows, and that's progressed into more training, more licensing, more complicated products, and now FDA compliant medical devices like laser and shockwave therapy.
So how do you make your own shockwave device? That sounds insane to me. I'm not an engineer by any ter I had a really good friend in the military who was a medical equipment repair technician, so I have like some background and kind of like what it would take to put together a device, but I still have no concept of this.
Yeah, great question. So in chiropractic school in Portland, Oregon, actually, one of my lifelong friends was in chiro school with me, and his neighbor was a manufacturer. So he would produce electronics and things, and he would talk to us about his work and his journey, and we were always kind of curious about that. And then years later, I basically was working for a medical group, loved that job as a chiropractor. They closed down, and a couple months later, COVID happened. So it was one
Yeah.
of those things where I had this sort of dream of making things just out of curiosity, always liking to take things apart and be creative in whatever platforms I could use. And, I started talking with him and taking other courses and kind of digging into how I might make certain things. And essentially, yeah, not an engineer myself either, but I learned how to, get financing, hired contract engineers, do product prototypes and everything else. So it was a long process over years, but I had some mentors and some investment that kind of led me down the road. But each product and each iteration is sort of a gamble in the sense that you have to spend a lot of money up front and you hope
Right.
that if you build it, they will buy it. And most of the time that has worked, but not for the faint of heart. But each stage I was able to kind of figure out how to make more complicated things by bringing in more and more complicated specialists and contractors.
Yeah.
But they don't do that for anyone. They don't want to work with people that are amateurs. So
Sure.
to say, hey, look, I did XYZ. Here's the history of my business record. More doors started to open, and that's what allowed me to make more complicated products. But my engineering brain is not, the best in the sense that I'm not writing code or using like the CAD computer assisted drawings and stuff. A lot of my
Right.
stuff
Yeah.
is on scratch paper designs, and eventually I learned some of those systems. But yeah, I started pretty small without a lot of technical skill and just kept building that over years.
Well, it's a good solid story. I mean, it's a good metaphor for aspiring inventors or entrepreneurs within the profession to understand is you don't have to be the engineer in the chain. You do
Mhm.
have to have a vision and be able to communicate the vision very well, right? But you might
Yeah,
not speak the language of code or the language of whatever, Python or whatever they're using. You don't have to speak that language, but you
yeah,
do need to be able to, they need to be able to translate what you're trying to say into reality.
yeah,
I don't know, it's kind of got an Elon Musk feel to it in some ways. From what I understand, he's not like a pure engineer. I don't know much about him, but
yeah,
he's not obviously the one building the rocket ships.
yeah, exactly.
He's not the one like building the Tesla cars, but he had the vision for things to happen and then the way to connect all the dots and have the really smart people do it
Yeah.
and then put it out into the marketplace. And maybe you're the Elon Musk. Would that be that's going to offend some people though. Because he's got like this political thing now where now saying you're the Elon Musk of chiropractic would be offensive. But I'm
So
going to go with it, at least from his non-political, creative, entrepreneurial side. Yeah, let's
sure, he
do it.
definitely inspired some of those early ideas. So when I worked for that medical group, they were an hour away from where I live. So it's partly why I didn't just, open up shop somewhere else nearby. But that hour commute, I would do nonfiction books about business
Yeah,
uh, and stuff. So that actually gave me kind of a good background to start the company as well. But in the sense that I knew he didn't really worry about patents that much, or his approach was essentially to bring in other smart people and kind of come up with ideas and then test those ideas and be willing to risk a lot and gain a lot. So I found his approach interesting. That's partly why I chose the name Portland Health Supply as like a generic early on for funding purposes. The not wanting to pay for a trademark using a generic name that didn't
Yeah.
the trademark requirements. So there are certain like business concepts that I was like, I've heard somebody else do this. I'm going to take a stab at it with my own sort of approach.
Yeah, just be the first use of commerce for that.
Yeah,
And then you can kind of own it from there, trademark wise at least.
yeah, exactly. Yeah, so a lot of those things were just kind of reading blogs and books and guessing and checking. But
I had some background story behind that. So from what I understand, going through justia.com, and somebody had at one point tried to steal the trademark of the Forward Thinking Chiropractic Alliance and name it as their own.
mhm,
That was fun.
yeah,
Obviously, it never happened or anything, but I once they do that, you can see their name and who they are. And
yeah.
now I know forever what chiropractor tried to steal the
Chiropractor
FTCA's.
tried to do it.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah, yeah, yeah, yeah.
yeah. I've since done it just to have the protection from it, but I was told that yeah, no one could give a cease and desist for a generic name.
That's right.
Yeah.
And uh, and then the Chiropractic Success Academy, another company that I started with Kevin Christie, somebody else tried to start a Chiropractic Success Academy, like right around the same time. So it could have been purely accidental naming.
Yeah.
I don't think it was nefarious at all, but they
Yeah.
sent, if I recall correctly, they sent us the cease and desist letter. And I was like, well, hold on, hold on, hold on. And then I went through and tried to look at who might have used the name first, because Chiropractic Success Academy is a pretty generic name.
Yeah.
I wanted to see who used it first in commerce, because that's kind of the yardstick for these trademark issues, is who used it first and put something up for sale with that name. And
Yeah.
we were first by, I think it was a couple weeks, maybe like 2 months at the most.
Yeah.
So it went all the way to the Trademark and Patent Office, the U.S. Trademark and Patent Office, where they had patent attorneys threatening us to go all the way to that court. And I just started engineering my letters, and I understood the law. I had to become an amateur attorney, and write these letters in the
Yeah.
language of legalese, and they backed off. They they paid the price of trying to pursue it further.
Yeah, it's sad that anyone would have that thought process and then also try to drag things through the courts. But I guess that's part of being American is people love to be litigious, unfortunately.
You could lose though.
Yeah,
And if
exactly.
you take me on, you're probably going to lose.
Yeah,
What I really wanted to talk about, what I wanted to really have a discussion about, though, primarily with you, was Shockwave in general.
yep.
Because it just seems like, I'm an observationalist person. I'm always trying to observe what's going on in the profession, what people are talking about, where their mind is, what they're thinking about, their concerns. And Shockwave has blown up,
Mhm.
especially in the Forward Thinking Chiropractic Alliance Facebook group, like the number of questions and posts and comments that come up around Shockwave. And like you said off the air, it's not a new piece of technology by any means, but it really has blown up lately. And I wanted to get your ideas behind that, or maybe you have some ideas of the reasoning behind that.
Mhm.
And then what Shockwave kind of is generally, but really what kind of benefit can it bring to a chiropractic practice is the biggest thing.
Mhm. Yeah, it's probably my biggest passion now in this space. I've just seen great results, personally in the research. When you do the deeper dives, there's a lot of evidence there supporting it. Of course, nothing works, 100% of the time for everybody, but uh,
Sure.
low risk and lower barrier for entry for the cost compared to, some of the first generation focus shockwaves that were more popularized.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's exciting stuff. I think the big change has just been more venture capitalists getting involved in products. Like Softwave has spent a lot of money on advertising over the years. Other brands have kind of followed suit. So a lot of people on social media are seeing a lot of different ads, and I think gradually just word of mouth is another thing. Colleagues talk with each other. That's where most of my customer referrals come from, or other customers, because they say, "Hey, what have you been up to? What's working in your practice?" But another part of that, I think, is just cash services with the headaches we have with insurance. I think people are also excited to buy something that they can charge a cash rate for and have a little more flexibility and independence from
Sure.
the insurance cycle. So that's been, I think, part of the wide adoption. But for me, I'm kind of a nerd. I like talking about the science, and that's sort of been my way that I've reached people is posting about the literature that's out there. And that's sort of been where I've become more passionate about it, is seeing all the different myriad of conditions that it works for. And I'll talk a little bit about that today. So it's not, intended to be a sales conversation. I want to try to share some facts with your listeners and potentially kind of misconceptions that are out there, because a lot of people, even the manufacturers, people that are selling these devices, get a lot of the science
Sure,
wrong too.
sure. Where does Shockwave knock it out of the park?
So
Top conditions or top
yeah,
presentations.
yeah, top presentations, especially in the literature, is more tendinopathies, more surface level. I think part of that is just the radial shockwave devices that are created with a little bit less technology, cheaper to make, and they use basically a ballistic bullet that hits a metal interface, and that creates a sound wave that goes into your skin, ripples through your body, sort of like tilling the soil. And it's a similar concept for the focus machines. They just use a more complicated system of physics to create the sound wave, but because a lot of the research has been done with lighter energy levels than we're using nowadays in more recent studies that can easily penetrate to the articular surface of a hip, shoulder, or even the spine. A lot of them started out with plantar fasciopathy and epicondylitis were probably the two biggest ones. So I would say they might be the ones with the greatest research. And then tendinopathies of the shoulder is another common area for studies.
Yeah.
But personally, I see results really on anything I apply to. I think the biggest limit, so I produce radial shockwave devices. I don't produce focused ones, but radial shockwave, and like I said, they kind of do the same thing. It's just almost like a garden hose versus a pressure washer.
Yeah.
So it's a little more elbow grease to use a shockwave, a radial shockwave, maybe to the center of a shoulder than it would for a focused device. But essentially, you can use that on spine. There's studies for spine, hip, anything you can think of for both radial and focus. But a common misconception would be that radial is just for things you can palpate like epicondylitis, but you can use focus for anything. But I think that's a misconception. There's plenty of evidence for both, and depending on the study, one beats the other one. So it's not really conclusive for superiority that way.
Gotcha. Got you. What about neurological things, radiculopathies, neuropathy, things
Mm-hmm.
of that nature?
Yeah, so the neat thing with radial shockwave, it sounds like this panacea, so take it with some skepticism.
Yeah. Uh-oh. Yeah. Right.
Right? But it has a couple dozen proposed mechanisms, sort of like light therapy or laser. If you kind of look into that stuff, there's a ton of things that can potentially be happening on a cellular level. But on a higher level, essentially, there's a few primary benefits. It's going to activate through hormonal signaling locally and systemically. Will actually call potentially stem cells from the bone marrow through the circulatory system to an area you treated based on some of those hormonal changes. So stem cell activation, vasodilation, which is sort of in that same ballpark. You're going to create new blood vessels with the treatment. But the pain mitigation, I think, is really exciting, especially for musculoskeletal people that are dealing with pain. That's part of what sells the device for a lot of people. Is it's frequently you can use this on someone, especially with chronic pain. They might have had something for 5 or 10 years that they thought they were sort of stuck with, and you can get a kind of sizable breakthrough in their pain from one session. And what happens with that aspect of the mechanism of shockwave therapy is that you can actually break down some of the uh, unmyelinated or uninsulated peripheral pain fibers.
Yeah.
So those nerves will kind of fray off, and they're not significant. They grow back, but they disrupt that pain feedback loop that's been there. So that and then the fluid exchange improves. So the lymph flow kind of gets some of the inflammatory proteins out at the same time. But you've got the hormonal, cellular, you got the structural and peripheral changes to the nervous system, and then also that pain input going into the brain as part of the treatment. They've actually showed that if you use analgesic before treatment, it's less effective than if you have,
Interesting.
yeah. So the pain is part of what's changing too. You're feeling pain going into that area in a new way, remapping the brain, which is pretty exciting.
That was probably going to be my next question is the pain science angle or application, like how much of it is, uh, you know, reducing fear messaging or danger messaging.
Yeah.
And then which thing is probably most responsible for that? Would it be the reduction in inflammation,
Mm-hmm.
um, better blood flow? I mean, obviously you're just kind of hitting all of it at once, right?
Yeah, it depends on the person, but I suspect it's the probably the plastic changes to the central
Yeah.
nervous system. through that input that's the most immediate because you're going to need weeks to see some of the structural changes. Um, while we're on it, I know a lot of practitioners will use the terminology of like breaking up scar tissue as I can or explain it to patients. I know like a pain science or maybe evidence
Yeah,
loosely.
I'm clenching. Off camera, I'm
Yeah,
clenching. I'm clenching
exactly.
my stress ball.
Yeah,
Yeah.
so it's not really doing that in the same way. Like you might use instrument assisted massage or manual therapies to change the nervous system and the fluid exchange in the area. It does have structural changes, but they take longer. But you're not going to break down scar tissue with this immediately, which is actually great because if you did do that, then you'd have a lot more side effects. But it's
Yeah.
scattered apoptosis and a slow regeneration. So you don't see a tear line from where you treated along, a bone spur or a growth plate. But they have shown that when it interacts with really any type of tissue other than fat, it's been associated with regrowing the tissue and generally with the way your body naturally heals itself. Most of the time, the bone will reorient or the ligament or tendon will reorient how it's supposed to be. But that's sort of a difficult concept for some people. Like, if this is creating new tissue, how can it break down my bone spur or the calcifications in my tissue? And it's sort of like the scattered apoptosis on a really microscopic scale allows the body to kind of take in those nutrients and proteins to create new tissue and hopefully the right orientation. That's where you can take something that's dysfunctional structurally and see some changes on imaging later on where it's back to, normal, quote unquote.
Yeah. 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 I can see that. See, like a bone spur, you're going to want to change loading patterns and movement and
Yeah.
maybe supportive orthotics or something like that in the process.
Yeah. I'm glad you mentioned that. I think it's the first slide of my slide deck when I lecture on this is basically making fun of the Turkish sharpshooter from the Olympics a couple years ago, where they
Yeah.
had
Uh-huh.
all the technology, and then there's a guy that just stands there and shoots the gun.
He just shoots
None
his
of this,
gun. Yeah. Yeah.
yeah, he doesn't overthink it. He knows what works, and that's true of the best things we do are lifestyle changes, exercise, nutrition. There's a lot in pain science in terms of the way our relationship with pain, how we think about movement and ADLs and stuff, and of course adjustments and their modalities. So this doesn't replace anything in my opinion. There are a lot of people that surprise me that just do Shockwave for some patients, but I always tell people whenever they've studied it, as far as I've seen and reading probably hundreds of studies at this point, is it's always better when they pair it with another modality. So it's synergistic and exercise being, probably the most common and most strong thing you can do for any condition. So don't think of this as something that's going to replace what you're doing. It's just something you can add on and speed up treatments or get some difficult things that aren't healing to have another input.
Yeah. I was going to ask it like if it was an A/B split test and you did just shockwave on, we'll say like, we'll just use plantar fasciitis because that's the first sort of go-to, right?
Yeah.
You just did shockwave alone, and then you did shockwave plus other things,
Mhm.
whatever your bag of goodies is, and you threw it at.
Yeah.
You're going to have better outcomes with shockwave plus bag of goodies versus shockwave alone. Is that something you
Yeah.
would agree with?
Yeah, that generally seems to be the case. So I can't think of a
Or
study
it would
where,
get you there faster, right? It would get
yeah,
you to where you want to go faster.
yep. Yeah. And sometimes that's for, the pure effect of the condition, but I think you can argue that, some of what we do is placebo and,
Sure.
that might be partly why. And placebo is not, I think it gets a bad rap. I think it's a really great tool sometimes, but I think sometimes the noise and discomfort that's associated with, any type of shockwave therapy is part of the medicine in a way. The noxious stimulus can have
Something's happening. There's all this noise, and I can feel the banging going on. Something's
exactly.
happening. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So I think the discomfort is part of that. But it doesn't replace the other things we do. And it doesn't mean that it's, doing all these magical things. You got to put the work in to get the magical results.
Has the quote unquote discomfort, has the technology changed that over the years? Is it still like I sat through a test of Shockwave, I'm going to say probably 10 years ago or so, maybe a little bit less than that. And it
Mhm.
was a little too jarring for me. Like
Yep.
for me, I was like, wow, if I did this, if I crept up on a patient and I didn't warn them adequately and have the conversation and I did this, they
Yep.
were going to be like, what the hell, man? You're hitting me with a stick, like an electric stick.
Yeah.
Um, but I also feel like that's kind of you have like it's a shock wave. You have to have a shock wave, so something has to be produced in the process. physics
Yeah.
wise, but has the comfort level been changed over time with radial or focused?
Yes. Yeah. So Focus, I think inherently is a little more comfortable because they use sort of a rubber ball more or less as the
Okay.
applicator. And so the sound wave isn't necessarily going to be felt right on the surface of the skin. There's no percussion element or instrument assisted sort of massage with it. You kind of glide gently over the area and it produces essentially it takes sound waves and focuses them together for
Okay.
most types of focus. There's one type of focus that uses electrohydraulic that starts with shock waves and stays at shockwave until the intersection. So I should explain that for radial shockwave and things like, I always hear different pronunciations of a piezo wave,
Okay.
uh, other types, stores and things that use a different mechanism to basically take sound waves that point at each other. When they overlap, if you picture waves splashing in a pool, when the two people, splashing on one side, when those waves intersect, they create a bigger wave, a
Yeah,
bigger amplitude.
magnification effect, sure.
Yeah, exactly. And that's how you produce the focus waves. So that's why right on the skin, it's not necessarily as powerful as when you focus them together deeper below the skin into the target tissue. Whereas the electrohydraulic is technically a higher amplitude wave the whole distance. But what all that really matters is when you get to the tissue, have you got enough energy to that tissue, whether it's sound waves, focus shock waves, combination of both as it reflects the tissues. What matters is did you get enough energy to the right spot to disturb the tissues? And so that's what I was saying before. The studies are somewhat comparable when they do get the correct energy density across machines. But one of the pitches for one of the most famous brands I mentioned already, Shockwave, is that they took that focus wave that's a little sharper, like a pressure washer, and they broadened it.
Okay.
And broader, it's a little bit less comfortable, or
Sure,
a little
sure.
more comfortable than when it's really targeted. So there have been some innovations that way. And then in the case of my device versus the store's device, which is the most commonly seen radial unit branded as Curamedic sometimes, or Chattanooga or Keenis Medical, that one doesn't have a rubber cap over the treatment head, whereas mine has a rubber cap. With the radial, because you're smashing metal pieces together to make the impact, there's a little bit of percussion on your skin. And so the addition of rubber cap on the applicator with radial shockwave has made it a little bit less sensitive over bony areas. So you have a slight cushion as a rubber medium between the skin. So little steps like that have made it more comfortable
What's
for
the
sure.
depth of penetration?
Yeah,
I
this
mean,
is
obviously it's adjustable on some levels, but how deep can you get?
yeah. So when they talk about some of the brands will say ours is true shockwave or the only true shockwave, and
Oh,
that doesn't
that's very chiropractic.
right. It's very much like okay,
This is
shockwave.
pure shockwave.
Yeah, shockwave is it's very much like the pure kairos in a sense. The shockwave is a term in physics. It's not a clinical term.
Yeah,
That's why
because obviously different waves are being made by different things in different ways.
yeah, yeah. So I get people used to debate me more that I'm saying radial shockwave and like it's not true shockwave, but that's what all the researchers use because they're talking about the clinical outcomes and the clinical mechanism of action, and those are the same. So a true shockwave device is not going to necessarily be any better, but they say that um, the electrohydraulic ones are the pure true shockwaves, and they have the potential to reach like 12 centimeters.
Oh, wow. Okay.
But we don't know that, especially because the electrohydraulic ones are more likely to not actually sync up and create the focus wave. So you can be using those and not feel anything. All of a sudden they click again together, and then
And they
ooh,
hit that crossing point where you get the wave magnification.
yeah, and they're bouncing around. That's why some people say not to use it on the thorax or spine because it can create a positive pressure and then negative pressure vacuum
Yeah.
in the
Yeah.
thorax. But in their defense, I really don't think that there's much concern. There are a couple case studies where people used lithotripsy, an even higher powered shockwave device, and they found when they're breaking up kidney stones a little bit of lung damage. So
Sure.
that doesn't really correlate to the same type of technology or those risks. So all those manufacturers use it on the spine, and I don't have a problem with that. But I think it's somewhat misleading to say that you need 12 centimeters of penetration because the average lumbar disc from the skin is 7 centimeters.
Yeah.
So people, maybe you're treating the abdominal aorta with your 12 centimeter
No.
penetration, but more likely it's bouncing all over the place, all over the bones and organs, and we don't know how deep it's going. We just really rely on what the patient's telling us. Are you feeling it in the right spot? And does that make sense for me with my parameters, how much energy I'm using, that I think it's roughly going to the right spot? So you have to take a little bit of the settings and the protocols and match that with what the patient's experiencing because they're going to have all these tissue planes that absorb the sound in different ways. So you can't really predict how deep it goes, but up to 12 centimeters for focused. Um, Piezo wave is probably more like 6 centimeters. I can't speak to that brand specifically, but in general, that mechanism of focused shockwave is a little bit less depth. And like a Chattanooga stores might be more like 4 centimeters, um, roughly correlated to the amount of energy they're using, which this is really esoteric, but the bars of energy for pneumatic radial shockwave, the air ones that look like a handgun, that probably reaches about a centimeter or so, maybe a little bit more per bar of energy. Again, variables on the tissue type and everything. But in the case of my radial shockwave, which is magnetic driven, roughly 6 bars, roughly 7 centimeters or so penetration. So sometimes you'll see ads where it's like our electrohydraulic reaches a foot deep, and the other ones only reach like a centimeter, but they're all relatively
Well, I'm
close.
trying to run through my mind what would I want to what would I want somebody to reach within me that was 12 centimeters deep? And I'm like, nothing. I don't want anything. I don't
Yeah,
want anything deep in there to be hit by anything.
yeah. Most
That's
of the
why
time,
it's deep in there. It hasn't been evolved to a point where it takes on shock damage.
yeah, and especially if it's high powered and you're turning it up because the patient can't feel anything, and all of a sudden it is intense. It doesn't really
Yeah,
be forgiving even with the focus units, but the nice thing with radial is what you're getting as soon as you touch it to their skin. It's going to be strongest at the skin, and you kind of point almost like a flashlight. Like if I put this on a foramina or like a facet plane, I'll feel it go into the spinal cavity, and it changes the sensation from like a percussion or external feeling to all of a sudden that deep, non-specific low back pain or discogenic pain feeling. So you can feel the sound waves kind of get around different tissues, almost like an X-ray, which I think is pretty fun. But yeah, the nice thing is that no matter where you apply it, it seems to be pretty safe even for the focus devices.
that's a differ from ultrasound. Like, what's the difference? Because ultrasound makes waves, but ultrasound's pretty much garbage,
Yeah,
more or less.
yeah,
That's the consensus at this point.
yeah, I think the ultrasound is, it's not a modality that I've loved to use. I've used it in the past, sort of as instrument massage and maybe some heat. But yeah, I
Yeah,
think there's limited evidence, and maybe it's more a steam and cream type of modality than really effective. But there's evidence for it, certainly in some studies. But that's going to be more superficial. It's not going to actually disturb. It doesn't have what they call in the industry transcutaneous mechanotransduction, which is basically a fancy word for saying you get mechanical movement underneath the skin without breaking the skin. So you don't get that from ultrasound. That's going to sort of shake on a really tiny level some of the cells, but it's not going to distort and cause the hormonal changes or the structural changes like you might see with.
gotcha. Not enough power. Not enough
Exactly.
power, depth, and penetration.
Yep.
Okay.
Yeah. So technically, sound wave therapy for both, but yeah, one of them is more heat, and the other is more mechanical impact.
Not to be confused with the electrical muscle stim, which is like that's basically a door stop at this point.
Yeah, I see some fascinating things out there. I forget the name of the device where they're using like DC current, maybe it's like the noob. They basically have people work out as they have the long cables of the E-stim working, but I've seen a lot of
Yeah,
PTs that are using that and having success with it. But I think once again, it's like if we combine things with movement, which I still recommend for shockwave therapy too, when I can, I have the patient moving because you're reprogramming the brain. But I think E-stim with movement is has a lot of potential just to kind of change how the brain's interacting with the tissues
sure.
and wiring patterns. But by itself, it is sort of in that category of like, would a pain science-based doc be using E-stim and ultrasound in practice? Heck of no.
No, it was purely passive. No, nothing that's just purely passive for sure.
Yeah.
And bless their hearts, there are people that just want to turn on a machine and then with some sort of arm, a mechanical arm, and just they just want the patient to rest while they turn it on and it's doing something, and then they can go off and do something else. And
Mhm.
bless their hearts, but I think they could, if they were, what would you call it? Outcomes focused instead of production focused. I think they obviously get better results if there was motion under any one of these modalities, if you could provide motion at the same time.
Yeah.
Motion's the lotion. So you could sort of, for some conditions, you could almost apply, I would call it, I'll use a brand name, but you could use like almost like a Graston or an ART type of approach or sweeping type of movement
Mhm.
with a shockwave while they're under motion and
Absolutely. Yeah. I
it,
definitely recommend that. It doesn't work for every sort of application because sometimes it's like you're not going to be able to stay on an area. Like if you're trying to treat, chondromalacia patella, and you have a sort
Right.
of that's you're trying to envelop the patella, it's going to slide off if they're doing the range of motion. But yeah, when I can, I try to do that, and I have attachments on mine that take away from sort of the true shockwave or sound wave therapeutic aspect of the shape of the device, but it's some that basically look like metal probes. And I use those to do soft tissue work. So I get a little percussion, I get a little sound wave therapy, but for me, I'm thinking treating some of the accessory like soft tissue work versus I might use the flatheads that don't have that instrument sort of deep, digging and scraping
Yeah.
aspect or like a joint surface.
So providers can buy a shockwave. They can bring one into their practice.
Mhm.
That's kind of like step one, right? Okay, now
Yep.
you got this thing in your practice. I'm going to skip step two and we'll do that kind of at the end, but I'm going to go right to step three. And step three is like where, how, in what ways do they learn to be good at applying shockwave?
Mhm.
So I'm not like educational, like how to set it up, that's cool. But I'm talking about more of these nuanced things that you're talking about, which is what you can feel with the wand.
Mhm.
How do you get to this mastery level of uh, technical application of the shockwave device, using it under motion, being a good clinician with the shockwave device, not just
Mhm.
buying it and then like zapping people with it and then taking their money. Like, how do you get really good at using it so that you get these outcomes? We're talking bell curve, right?
Mhm.
Like in our bell curve, the left end is like you're horrible at it, which is probably very unlikely, right? But then the main bell curve, like we want to be on the right side of the bell curve. How do you get pretty good at it? And then if you wanted to be a master at it, like how would you master the concept of shockwave application? Where can somebody go?
Mhm. Yeah, so with my customers, I train them personally. There are courses that people make, and it's sad because you see them, they're basically designed around, the XYZ system that they're sort of branding. They're using AI to design them, and the AI hallucinates. And so I've read through a
Yeah.
lot of these and they try to make protocols for individuals that are conditions that really don't make sense because you might have a 100-pound patient and a 300-pound patient. So one of the things I really emphasize for people, knowing that you're essentially setting an energy density and you're trying to search for the lesion. So if you have someone that's, like twice the size of your previous patient, using that protocol on them, you might not be reaching them, whereas the other one it might be too intense. So even though, the nerd in me wants to be as specific to the literature as I can, what the systematic reviews actually do say is that when they're doing their analysis, when I do my analysis, I see the same thing is that the common trend seems to be you want to try to recreate the symptoms for the patient and turn up the amount of energy to create a significant amount of discomfort. So that way, you're interacting both at the very least with the nervous system, but you're getting that energy input near where there's the negative interaction of the nervous system and the signaling to the brain. That seems to be the most reliable way to do it. But what I tell people is rather than just like looking at a protocol, pointing it and leaving it, or even worse, I think, is people kind of like ultrasound will just cover a huge area. And it's like, well, you're now not even on the
Oh
spot.
yeah, yeah.
You're
Yeah, that
free.
doesn't sound good.
Yeah, you want to get as specific as you can, and you want to check in multiple times in a visit. So you don't want to just set it and forget it. You want to pause and say, okay, what's changed for you now? Where's your pain level at? I arbitrarily say around a 5 out of 10. I've heard systematic reviews say maximum pain tolerance, but if it's a geriatric or pediatric, maybe you're at a 2 or 3 out of 10, and you calibrate that to the protocols and stuff too. But you want to check in and kind of make sure that as you treat them, most of the time they get less sensitive. Um, you want to turn up the energy potentially and kind of chase it. They might no longer feel the chief complaint or much of that therapeutic benefit after a couple hundred shocks, or they might even find sometimes I'll see I see it mostly in treating the QL. Once we get that to loosen up, which might have been the chief complaint, then they'll get hip pain. So now they get sort
Yeah.
of like a glute med trigger point, which is kind of crazy. So chasing it, making sure you're customizing it each time and changing it throughout the session. So the more you listen to the patient, stop and talk with them and get that biofeedback, the better. I think that's the closest or the fastest way to mastery, and then just using on yourself. There's
It
no toxic.
sounds a lot like soft tissue work. Like
100%.
the area of discomfort or the area where they're receiving the patch of tissue that's nociceptive, right? Is like
Absolutely.
it can be large, and then as you work, it gets smaller and smaller and smaller. And then the hip and the shoulders, like the ball and socket or pseudo ball and socket type joints, it moves around on you, right?
Yep.
It's like it's anterior shoulder, then the next week it's kind of like posterior, and then you're
Yeah.
underneath the shoulder, and you've got to chase it around and shrink it and shrink it and shrink it. Yeah,
Yeah.
it makes sense. It makes complete sense if people are on that thought process already, and constant communication, right? Like, is that spot? Am I on it? What? How about if we move here, changing the angle of the shock wave?
Mhm. Yeah,
I can
absolutely.
do this. It sounds like I can do this.
Honestly, it's so way that they've done like grass and ART or even dry needling. I'm like, this is gonna like make so much sense to you. It's gonna be really intuitive. If I train like a nurse practitioner or someone that maybe has just primarily done straight adjusting, it might take a little bit more to learn some of those secrets in terms of, I think especially like lesions upstream and downstream. You know,
Yeah,
sometimes to say, okay, the pain is here, but when I see this, when I'm doing soft tissue work, I know there's usually something else going on, another lesion here. So I want to treat both spots and kind of see, test, and retest. So that makes it a longer treatment, maybe in some ways, but I think a lot more effective. And you're going to avoid those cases where I feel like the success rate's really high because you're not just pointing it, hoping that it gets there. You're
yeah.
constantly checking and thinking about, the whole system rather than just one spot.
You're not throwing a dart at the wall. You're trying to actually hit a target.
Yeah.
Even if your target's perceived, I think you would get better at target acquisition as you went.
Yeah. Yeah.
Unless you were already, like you said, with grass and ART, dry neat, like you already had some sort of target acquisition platform already that can
Mhm.
help you, but then developing that as you go. So, okay, so step one was like acquire Shockwave machine. And then we skipped to step three, which is master the art of Shockwave treatment. But we skipped step two, which would be um, how do you implement it in your office? Like, how do you, so one day you don't have Shockwave,
Mhm.
and then you go out, you do step one, you buy one, now you bring it in, and all of a sudden it's like, surprise, patients, we're doing this now.
Mhm.
Seems like a bad business plan.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
But how do we roll that into the office? And because I in my mind I'm thinking patients don't care. Like, how many patients here, we'll do this one first. How many people are actually just physically seeking out Shockwave? Or are they seeking out a result? And it doesn't matter how they get the result, they just want the result.
It is surprising now how many people are searching for it by name. I think that's because of the ad spend and Meta's basically
So
removed the ability
that's the
to target.
difference, isn't it? Yeah.
Yes, patients are looking for it. And even like my father, it took him a while to implement something new. He's a chiropractor. And a couple months ago, he actually started using my device and just putting on his website. A surgeon he had never spoken with from, I think an hour away, found his website, found, the radial shockwave therapy on it and said, yeah, I've heard about this. I have a patient that's going to be down that area. I'm going to send to you because, I don't know his beliefs about chiropractic, but I think a lot of allopaths see Shockwave and say, this makes sense. I see the evidence. Mayo Clinic talks about it
Yeah.
on their website. I think that that's been a referral source for people from allopaths that don't want to necessarily spend the time to do it. But yeah, their providers are referring for it, and then patients are hearing about it both in ads and from other friends. And I think the biggest selling point for this is stem cell. People hear stem
Oh,
cell
yeah.
activation, and that's in every sort of health and wellness sort of
Yeah, that's rough. Yeah.
now. It's annoying, but at the same time, it is part of it. We've seen that objectively shown in studies, but this selling, the pitching it to patients is surprisingly easy. And I think part of it is people spend, hundreds of dollars on Sky Mall or other random junk that we don't even know
Yeah.
about. They might spend, thousands of dollars potentially on injections or deductibles and things, but the idea of spending, chiroeconomics says 75 to 150 per session is sort of the range that they see across the country. And a few
Yeah,
blog.
sure.
So let's say, $100 a session, and maybe you're doing 6 to 8 sessions. So if you have a chance without any, really side effects besides the same ones as massage, more or less, if you have that ability to regrow and make some changes to, your structural tissues, potentially regrow cartilage, or just attack chronic pain from a different angle. I think a lot of people see that and say, I'm willing to, gamble a couple $100 on this. So I've never actually had a customer out of like the 200 out there that has said, hey, I'm having a hard time selling this. Can you coach me up on some of the patient communication? Seems to
Yeah.
kind of for people, and they have the brochures and stuff, and patients are willing to spend for a cash service like that.
What's the time for a patient like we're just talking averages here to see a result. So I'll make comparisons like class 4 laser. You're going to need a couple exposures before they start to notice something. Maybe
Mhm.
like three, four, two, three, it depends, but you're going to need a couple exposures before they notice. How quickly can a patient walk away from Shockwave and go, oh, something definitely happened here and I'm noticing? Like, is it for even clinical audit process day one, or does it take a little bit to build up?
I would say more often than not, right away, people notice some type of change. And it doesn't mean that their pain went away, but they usually say, okay, that hurt while it was happening, but I felt like you were in the right area. And now as I'm moving it around, something is different. And I haven't had a treatment where something felt different. You know, this works for acute pain too, but I think the breakthroughs are especially for chronic pain. But people essentially notice some type of change, and that might just be purely classic, central nervous system changes. But a lot of providers will give away one free session, and that by itself, patients are like, I don't know what that was. It was loud and it hurt, but something changed, and I'm willing to go down this, path. And it's usually most studies are one time a week for 4 weeks. We're seeing that change. It doesn't make sense that they've all been that way. It seems that they copied each other, but
Yeah, sure.
different conditions, different types of the body, different severities. You'd think there would be more customization, but we are seeing more visits now in literature. Or potentially spacing it out. But I would say usually you notice something after one session. Um, I would expect in most cases really significant improvements at 4 sessions or 4 weeks. And then I recommend 6 to 8 because I feel like you start to get that momentum, and you're going to take a month or so before some of those structural changes anyway. So it helps to continue that anabolic
Yeah,
signal into the area. So ideally, I'd say, you're treating closer to 2 months, and nothing wrong. If you end up doing twice a week or more than, 8 visits, there's some evidence for that now. It's just like massage where if they're bruised and swollen when they come in a couple days later, then yeah, you want to wait for the next session. But
sure.
we're starting to see more visits and more frequency of visits in the literature too.
Awesome. I think I got it all out of my system there, all the things I wanted to ask.
Yeah,
Um,
it's a lot to read about on your platform as well, and the Facebook group. Like you said, you see the same questions over and over again. But I think it's because people confuse, especially in blog posts, the different types of shockwave and what they all do. But hopefully for some people, especially if you kind of go to those systematic reviews, you kind of remove the bias from
yeah.
limited viewpoints, and they can kind of see a broader picture of, hey, it all seems to work.
Well, that's why I'm pleased that Portland Health Supply is a sponsor of FTCA. And you know, the importance of sponsors, like if you look at the sponsors we have, they all occupy a certain space in the profession, right? And they're all chosen because they can provide clarity for certain subject matter that I think is important.
Mhm.
Like Jane and Cairo Up are the unique sponsors where it's two of the similar providers, but
Mhm.
they do come from different angles, so they can provide the EMR, EHR, education and service from a different angle.
Mhm.
And then like Chiro Health USA, they can provide this angle when it comes to understanding the I always get it wrong, DMPSO or whatever their thing is with the discounted medical options,
Mhm.
right? For patients who can't afford care right out the bucket and don't have insurance. And of course, when they hear that, they're going to say, "You said that wrong," and because that's what Rick Fox does. You said that wrong. You got to say it exactly this way. And I apologize, Dr. Fox. I'll get it better next time. And then who else we got out there? We have um, obviously NCMIC. There's not a better insurance, malpractice insurance source for information out there or
Yep.
provider. And then KMC University, when it comes to compliance and insurance, like I don't want to be, and I don't want someone to be, but I definitely don't want me to be the person who acts like they're the expert in any of these things. I'm a facilitator, right? So with the FTCA, I want to facilitate information and then bring the experts in. And I think we can establish you far and beyond as a shockwave expert for the community. And now that it's become such a hot topic, we need somebody that people can refer to say when they have questions, go just talk to Dr. Bruns. He knows the ins and outs, and he won't steer you wrong. None of this was a sales pitch for your product
Mhm.
yet. I'll I'll let you say something at the end for sure,
Yeah.
but but we need level-headed, responsible, expert area people to represent these ideas. And I would hope, geez, I would hope they had a good product as well to offer on the side end of that as well. So
Mhm.
I love having you around, and I hope people lean on you for expertise and for the products and to make sure that they're doing the right thing about their patients and doing the right thing for their practices when it comes to Shockwave.
Yeah, I appreciate that. Thank you. And
So
yeah, I
how
think
can they find you? How can they reach out to you? How can they learn more about Shockwave with Portland Health Supply? Like it's like when is it going to be Portland Shockwave Supply? Is it going to take over your whole existence at this point? All that stuff.
yeah, it definitely takes the most of my attention, but it's something that I love talking about. And every time I get a question, I kind of, especially clinical questions, it sends me down sort of a research dive. So, even if people have other devices, maybe you have a focus machine or you have a different radial device, I even answer questions for people in countries I don't sell in. So you do need to have like the legal and government
Sure.
compliance stuff. But I'm happy to help people. I think that's sort of been my philosophy with, if you put good information out there and try to help people, that's going to be its own form of advertisement. And I've definitely seen that through this group. I think people appreciate when you're trying to help people with the questions, and that goes
Yeah.
for those sponsors you talked about. I like when they comment and they give free advice because it's good for everybody. But reaching me through Portland Health Supply, my website is portlandhealthsupply.com. I'm pretty active on social media and in that Facebook group, so they can probably see my name, Andrew Bruns. You can also message me that way as well. But yeah, I try to be available for people. And I started kind of with the philosophy of a friend saying, hey, we're buying XYZ products. The customer service isn't necessarily great, or we want to make it better in these ways. And so for me, I try to make sure that I'm accessible for people, that I make maintenance and repairs for all these things really easy. So that's sort of my unique pitch of, why buy from me? I'm not going to drag it out with paperwork or filing claims. I just try to make it easy because I know people, if something breaks, you need your devices fixed so you can not have to reschedule all your patients. So I
Yeah.
think that's my unique thing is not salesy and try to be accessible. So if someone has questions and they're trying to figure out like make sense of this crazy soup of new devices that are out there, like why is there a price point from thousands of dollars to $80,000? What's the difference?
There's a reason. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm happy to just give them some information and try to make it as unbiased as possible. So
Well, hey, if
yeah,
you're really rocking a Shockwave, don't you need two? Like you need one, and then if
yeah,
that you don't want that thing to go down, but if it ever went down or needs service or repair, you need to not have any downtime. And
yeah, for sure. And I send backup parts and stuff to people too, so if
great.
that doesn't happen, they can swap it out. But yeah, I have people that have three
Yeah.
devices in their clinic, and even if people have focus and a lot of people have focus and radial machines too. So yeah, there's a lot of strategies there, but I think yeah, making sure it doesn't take a couple weeks or a month for you to get a part is an important consideration.
It's like that old Disney cartoon Aladdin. It's like a whole new world. It like
Yeah,
blows my mind a little bit. I'm glad I took this time to dive in with you, and hopefully I asked the questions that other people would have asked.
yeah,
I
definitely.
tried to kind of play the curious
Mhm.
layman here as far
Yep.
as I could, and I think hopefully we got there. But if anyone else has any other questions, obviously reach out to Dr. Bruns. You can reach out to me, and then I would pass that information on to you if you needed to do it that way. Thank you, thank you, thank you. And I look forward to seeing you and talking to you again.
Yeah, appreciate it. This was fun. And yeah, we'll talk soon. Thank you.
Sweet.